It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello and welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Monday, June 30th. It is Agronomic Monday, and I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. On today's show, we've got a great lineup for you. Ken Currah will be here to talk about tar spot scouting on corn. Yes, the dreaded tar spot. It is time to keep tabs. We heard that on Thursday's show as well. So Bern Tobin's got that latest corn school with Ken Currah. And then, of course, Peter Wee-Pete Johnson is going to join me for a couple segments. We've got lots on the docket. On my list are some weird insects. I do want to ask about last week's incredible heat and the impact it may have on both the winter-seeded cereals and the spring cereals. Of course, corn and soybeans are absolutely loving it. So whatever, that's fine. And we've got some questions building off of last week's episode of the Agronomists, talking about sidedress decisions on corn, but more importantly, talking about nutrient cycling and trying to pin down that ultimate nitrogen number for corn. So stick around for that. As always, if you've got feedback on today's show, 1-855-776-6147, or zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll hear all about tar spot scouting right after this.
Today is the launch of Invigor Gold, hybrid Brassica gensea, not in the traditional canola areas.
Joined by Stuart Brandt, global head of canola breeding. So gensea has been around for a while. This isn't your grandpa's gensea.
We've been able to improve the bottom end of the yield to make it more competitive, but we've also improved it so when times are better and growers are getting some moisture and they have maybe a little bit better organic matter content, the yields can compete with the best Napus varieties. Even in a good year, these will compete very well, and often that was a challenge with some of the early gensea, that work that had been done. In the traditional, what I would call canola growing area, Napus still outperforms gensea, but if we get into the brown soil zones, areas like this, and there would be some areas in and around North Dakota where this would be a very good fit and be competitive with Napus in good times and outperform it in tough times.
Invigor Gold, hybrid Brassica gensea, launching in Montana and the Northern Plains 2027, Central Plains in 2029, and hopefully Canada sometime in the early 2030s. Agriculture.bsf.us.
Since 2014, FP Genetics has led the way in bringing hybrid fall rye to Canadian farms. As the original purveyor, we've built decades of experience and trust right here at home. Canadian-owned, farmer-focused, and grounded in real agronomic knowledge, FP Genetics is your go-to source for rye. The future of rye in Canada starts with experience, and experience starts with FP Genetics. Visit fpgenetics.ca today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for this Agronomic Monday, Lyndsey Smith, and we hop now to tips on scouting for tar spot.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin. Welcome to the Corn School. Today I'm in Oxford County, catching up with Ken Currah, agronomist, BASF. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. Sun's shining, corn is growing.
And it's hot enough for you?
It's hot.
It's hot. Hey, and it's that time of the year, you and I want to talk fungicide strategy. I always start that conversation with the weather. I mean, people talked about the spring, different planting dates, April, May, June. When you look at the season, Ken, what are you seeing starting with that planting date?
Yeah, so we have quite a wide planting window again in 2025. Bern, right? We had a long planting window last year because of weather keeping some growers out of the field. There's pockets like that this year. Eastern Ontario had a few. You know, my territory in the heavier ground in Elgin, Southwest Middlesex. You know, so we had this planting window that opened up the last week of April, and then another window in May that preceded some cold weather and some of those developmental challenges that have been issued elsewhere. And then we got into kind of the last little bit where they have enough heat and enough season to plant corn in the early part of June. And we have, as a result, a very variable corn crop, but that said, wide application window forthcoming to manage disease in corn this summer.
Let's talk about the big disease. Tar spot, obviously, has been on our radar, been spreading across this province. Let's start there. I mean, in a field like this now, Ken, I mean, we're moving along pretty well. When is that window? When are you thinking tar spot arrives?
Tar spot has arrived. Right, so we're as you mentioned, we're in Oxford County. We have about 3 years history with tar spot. We're heading into year 5 in the province of having to actively manage it, depending on where you are. But as you look down at this residue here, we're in corn on corn ground, and the point we need to make, whether you're a grower that's dealing with tar spot for the 4th, going on 5th year now, or maybe you're in central and eastern Ontario looking to have an eye out to maybe I need to manage this for the first time because I had my first year of history last year. That field, once that inoculum is present on the residue, that's our first point of infection. And really key to note, Bern, that that 15 to 20 day latent period of infection in the corn plant before it becomes visible. And Albert Tenuta always seems to confirm tar spot the first 7-8 days of July. So we're looking at the calendar. We're here last week of June. We could probably assume that this corn crop has some degree of infection. We just can't see it yet.
I want to talk about timing, but first, let's have a look at this this corn here. I mean, it's hot. Very stressful. We're starting, maybe starting to see a little bit of leaf curl. Important to keep an eye on this one and not sort of like walk away from the yield potential you already have.
Yeah, exactly. This is the great old Oxford County ground, so you know what, it's digging its heels in the way it goes. But for growers that are in drought-prone areas, whether it's heavy clay, planted a little bit later, some development issues, or the sand and gravel areas that maybe got planted on time but are feeling some of that drought stress if they missed last week's rains. This corn crop right now, we're looking at, V8, V9 corn is what we're standing in today. Important to understand the development of a corn plant in terms of its actual yield potential and kernel slots. This crop has set its kernel round, the number of rows. It's in the process of determining its kernel length, and it'll do that up to about V12. Yeah. So in the next, couple weeks, depending on temperatures, etc. For growers in drought-prone ground, I've really noticed in my career a lot that, it's really tough to watch corn suffer in those 2 weeks leading up to tassel due to drought. But those kernel slots are set. That yield potential is there. You've fertilized it. You've invested in proper planting conditions and all the rest of it, right? You are into this corn crop, and that yield potential is there. And it's important not to lose sight of that when we're looking at drought-prone conditions and that fungicide decision.
And before long, we will be at, R1. We will be looking at timing this tar spot application. Talk about, that timing and, hitting the sweet spot.
Yeah, so the industry with Albert Tenuta's leadership and his research as part of the tar spot working group, we have a really good conviction around that one application of a product that has control of tar spot on the label at that R1 stage, that green silking stage. It's the best in that tar spot infection curve. That's really been the most reliable and consistent to optimize your ROI. And the real bonus there, we can't lose sight of gibberella ear rot and the fusarium ear rots and that dawn condition in corn. Extremely emotional issue, right? How fortunate are we that the prime tar spot management window for that fungicide application lands in the dawn management window? We're really fortunate in that regard, and that's really, depending on how application capacity is taxed and everything else, we're still going to really try to shoot to get as many acres as possible done in that window.
Let's talk about that window. Last year, tar spot a little later coming in. A lot of growers seeing it for the first time, spying it at R3. What's your message about that window? How late can we go? Yeah. How wide is that window?
Yeah, so you mentioned it, the theme of tar spot coming in late in some areas. Did it really come in late? For 4 years in a row, we've confirmed tar spot the first week of July, visible after that latent period that I mentioned earlier of that 15 to 20 days. So the infection is actually mid-June. It's not about when it arrives. It's about the ramp up. So that ramp up, it's a polycyclic disease. And, in agriculture, we have a lot of polycyclic diseases. This one is infecting off a residue. It's infecting off airborne sporulation. And with wetness, especially that extended leaf wetness in the crop canopy, we talk about that 7 hours for multiple days or nights in a row of leaf wetness. Tar spot's ability to ramp up is amazing, right? As a polycyclic disease, that's what we have to monitor is the ramp up. Because if we look at a year like 2024, last year, we saw really solid, consistent ROI, even up to that first application, not taking place to R3 or that white to yellow blister kind of period in the corn crop where we can get good ROI. That's a discussion with your certified crop advisor. Also to revisit your hybrid tolerance with your seed suppliers. That's an important part of the conversation. And really try to get a good foothold on how the disease is actually behaving in the fields, because we saw 2021, 2023, 2024 very quick ramp up. 2022 dry July, that ramp up was a lot slower and got more severe at the tail end of the corn plant's life.
Let's talk a little bit about a little later in the season, fungicides. We got to talk about late season plant health and standability. I mean, after we get through tear spot, there's a lot. We got some work to do.
And I think one of the key learnings from 2024 burn, despite the struggles to get that crop in the ground in the spring of 2024, we had some pretty phenomenal yield potential out there. The more yield potential you have, the more prone to a really significant devastating hit that crop is from multiple stressors. So that combination of tar spot defoliating the plant and slowing down and killing off that photosynthetic engine. Let's say you had root stresses due to late season drought, right? Like, we didn't have great roots on that crop last year. We were lucky it kept raining for most, but late season drought stress combined with tar spot, really significant hit on plant health and yield. Nitrogen management last year was a huge factor in how that crop pushed itself over the finish line and how growers were able to capture some or all of that yield potential through through assessing that combination of factors. So really important to understand, you add a significant stress to tar spot. This corn plant, it's setting its yield potential now. There's a lot of kernels to fill, and when it starts bailing out and cannibalizing to try to make that grain, it's pretty devastating. Not just, as I like to remind growers, it's not just about the yield return, it's not just about the dawn management in terms of what are my ppm levels and how do I market this, but what's your actual cost to reduce plant health when you're the one sitting in the combine? What does this actually mean to you as a grower? Yeah.
Well, hey, lots of season left, lots of great crop to protect. Ken, always great to have you on the Corn School. Thanks for stopping by.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure, Bern.
All right. Big thanks to Bern Tobin and to Ken Currah for that Corn School. Of course, you can head to our YouTube channel, search Corn School, and you can find literally years of agronomy advice. It's fantastic. Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and I'll be joined by Peter Repeat Johnson when we return.
Right now, Saskatchewan wheat producers like you see a $33 return for every dollar invested in wheat breeding. And because of your contribution, Sask Wheat can drive innovation by funding research and initiatives that make wheat profitable and sustainable for generations to come. Varietal improvements, including better yields, are all made possible by you. See your impact and how we support it at every step at saskwheat.ca.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Mazik Seeds and Lallemand Plant Care.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith. It is Monday, June 30th, and this segment is brought to you by Ag Expert. Deep in the fields and deep in the data to back up your decisions on the farm. Get started at agexpert.ca. All right, it's time to bring in your friend and mine, Peter Repeat Johnson. How are you, Pete?
I am awesome. Thanks, Lyndsey. You know, it's summertime. It's too hot for the wheat crop most of the time. So I'm getting lots of questions about, oh gosh, what's this doing to my wheat crop yield? But the corn and soybeans are just happy. So I guess you can't have it both ways.
We ask, but no, you're right. We can't. Okay, let's maybe start there. Early last week, I was the grumpiest I probably have been in a very long time because our daytime temp here in the Ottawa area last Monday was 35, 36 degrees plus the humidex. The air was gross and humid, and I looked around, Pete, and there's spring barley, there's winter wheat, all in head. What do temps like this do to these cereal crops that don't love it or are at this critical stage of either flowering or filling?
Yeah, and so first off, Lyndsey, I can't believe that you would be grumpy. I saw you on the Agronomists last Monday night, and you seemed 100% fine.
That's showbiz, baby. That's showbiz. All right. Anyway.
Yes. So the challenge becomes, Lyndsey, when you say, what is this doing to the cereal crop? So with winter wheat, we know that as soon as it goes over 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit, for those listening south of the border, that wheat yields start to drop. And the French data would say every day through grain fill that you lose 1 bushel per acre per day in the wheat crop when it's over that 25 degree temperature. If you get to barley, spring barley, or in your area, winter wheat, if it's just pollinating, then I think we have even greater issues when we get, and 30, if you say 34, 35, 36, if you cross 35 degrees Celsius, man, cereal crops they shut down. They just can't keep up, and if you get many days like that, they almost just stop grain fill entirely because those temperatures are beyond the range that they can cope with. So when you say, it was hot, well, how hot was it? The critical temperatures really are over 25. We don't like it. Over 30, we really start to go negative. Over 35, it's like almost immediate death. And I'm exaggerating that. I mean, if it's 35 for 3 days, does the plant die? No, but it really hammers it. And even if it cools off after that, it has more trouble recuperating. The easy way to look at it, the easy math, because I've been asked this question several times, both on the Word and on Twitter, is that we get about 660 growing degree days in grain fill. And so every day in grain fill is about 4 bushels per acre. And so if you do the math, if you don't go over 25 and you have a reasonably cool night, so if you're 25 in the day and 15 at night, that adds up to 40. You divide by 2, that's 20 growing degree days. And so it's pretty easy to say if I have 20 growing degree days, I'll get a 33-day grain fill, and you multiply that times 4 and say, well, gosh, if I did get that, I could get 132 bushels per acre. Where things really go south is when we get, a 35-degree day and a 25-degree night. Mm-hmm. Well, now we're at 60, and you divide 35 plus 25 is 60. Yeah, divide that by 2 is 30. So basically, I get to that, I'm at a 22-day grain fill. And you can see how that impacts now. Instead of, I'm at 88 bushels instead of being at 132. So every day we shorten up grain fill, we lose about 4 bushels in Ontario. And I mean, that rate of grain fill is a little bit different. It's not quite as fast as you move north because the solar radiation tends not to be quite as intense, but that's a decent number for most people to kind of think of. And if you get 3 hot days in a row, then you've probably lost at least 1 day of grain fill. We've had, 7 at least days where it's been hotter than I would like. So that's at least 2 days of grain fill, which is probably in that 8 bushel per acre range. But that assumes that the crop has good moisture, good fertility, and is not stressed.
Right.
And if the crop is stressed, right, if you don't have enough moisture, one of the things it has to do when it gets really hot is it has to try to cool itself down. That green leaf, the temperature inside that green leaf can just skyrocket, and a plant doesn't sweat, but it does transpire water, which has the same effect almost as sweating as it releases that water out of the leaf as water vapor. It absorbs some of the heat, and so it tries to cool itself down. If it's short moisture, then it can't cool itself down, and then that loss impact goes bigger. Or if it's stressed from a nitrogen deficiency or low pH or any other stress, those additive stresses really do add up. And then, that's if we're in good shape and we're in grain fill. If your barley crop is just at that pollination stage, it's trying to pollinate the spikelets on the head. And in particular in wheat, where we have multiple florets at each spikelet, you get super hot and it will just abort grains like crazy in the head because it's just too hot. It can't abort those grains. Once it aborts those grains, though, you just get much, much lower yield. So we call it blast in oat. If you're growing an oat crop, you will often, if it's hot at flowering, you'll see all these spots on the panicle that there should have been a seed, and instead you just see this little white kind of pair of glooms there that has nothing in it. Well, that's just heat blast. It was just too hot. It didn't pollinate, and so there's no seed there. And the same thing happens, not quite as obvious, but it happens in barley and wheat as well. Mm-hmm. So what does it do? Well, it depends on what stage the crop is at. Deep southwest here, it hit about day 11 or day 12 after pollination. So we're really lucky because the critical period is 14 days before pollination to 10 days after pollination. So, a little bit over 3 weeks, but we were out of the really critical phase before it got hot, which should mean we set lots of kernels and we got them fixed on the head. So they're much less likely to abort. The question is now how well can we fill those kernels when it gets hot in that grain fill period? Whereas if the Ottawa Valley was still in that critical period, it was day 3 after anthesis and we needed to get to day 10, then you could have quite a few less kernels on that head, and that has a much greater yield impact.
So now, assuming that we've got that yield, and let's hope, but you're right, depending on when where the crop was at, when the heat hit, we do need to think about fusarium. We do need to think about dawn production of this crop, because before we know it, we will be in the fields harvesting this crop. What do we need to know about our fusarium risk this year for the Ontario market anyway? And what do we need to be prepared to do harvest-wise if we do have fusarium in the crop?
Yeah, and so that's really an interesting scenario when you look at it across the Great Lakes Basin. And if I go into southern Ohio, I'm getting reports back that their crop is just very decimated by fusarium, that they've got tons of fusarium. And if you looked at the prediction maps, the fusarium prediction maps, it was solid red. It was the worst I've ever seen it in my career for fusarium risk at heading. And it went basically from Texas through Oklahoma, Kansas, up into Kentucky. But that line of high risk kind of cut through Ohio, took in New York State, and probably took in some of eastern Ontario and up into Quebec as well. But then that line ended. You get into Michigan, and they are at extremely low risk. So here in southwestern Ontario, we were on the cereal tour the last 2 Fridays. One was in the deep southwest, one was more in the central area. But we did see the odd head of fusarium, but not concerning whatsoever. Meanwhile, if you just go down into southern Ohio, it's just like, oh my gosh, fusarium is just going to be a nightmare again this year. And so, Lyndsey, your area is at much higher risk from a fusarium standpoint than we are here in southwestern Ontario. Having said that, you said 36 degrees. If it gets over 32 degrees, fusarium stops. So I think the temperature will probably save Eastern Ontario and maybe most of Eastern Canada from having fusarium issues, and perhaps even New York State. I'm not sure just exactly how far that line goes, but the temperature does have an impact as well. The bottom line on wheat harvest, though, whether you have fusarium, you don't have fusarium, we also have falling number issues, and you can get into black point. Like when nothing good, Lyndsey, nothing good happens to the wheat crop after it hits 30% moisture. The sooner you can get that crop out of the field, the higher the quality of the grain that you harvest. And that's a straight line relationship. It's test weight, it's dawn levels, it's falling number. It's just, why are you waiting? If the combine can drive through the field and you can do a good job of thrashing it and getting it in the bin, pay the drying charges and have high quality grain.
Okay, I will. This is our encouragement for everyone to do some napkin math on drying charges versus quality. Because we have this conversation on corn too, Pete, very often, right? And sometimes, I guess you could make the argument maybe if the crop isn't worth much or energy prices are through the roof and the drying charge is going to be huge. But usually if you actually do some of the hard math, it really comes out to show that you've worked that hard to grow that crop. You may as well maintain the highest quality you can and get it out of the field. So good advice there. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more on this Agronomic Monday with Peter Wheat Johnson right after this.
Soil health is under pressure, but real solutions start below the surface. Black Earth offers a full suite of humic solutions, from high-purity granules to powder, liquid, and soluble formulations, all powered by pure Humulite. Formulated for performance, backed by consistency, trusted by growers worldwide from one of the world's rarest reserves. Grow stronger with the power of Black Earth Humulite. Learn more from Mine to Market at blackearth.com.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and joining me once again on this Agronomic Monday, it is Wheat Pete, as he's known, at Wheat Pete on Twitter, Peter Wheat Johnson. Pete, you on the Word last week, and if you're not listening to the Word, everybody, head on over to YouTube, Spotify, Real Agriculture, wheatpete.com. Every Wednesday, Peter answers your agronomic questions. And so head on over there and do it. But this week, and I said on Twitter as well, our friend Ken Currah, good friend of the show, out scouting soybeans, found, in my mind, a lot of aphids. Am I wrong? Is this early? What's going on with aphids on soybeans right now?
You know, what's really cool, Lyndsey, about that Ken finding those soybean aphids is that he was in the field with our very own Bern Tobin doing a soybean school video on soybean fungicide timing, and he finds soybean aphids. And you just go, wow, man, that's just coincidence, but very, very cool. And yes, there was a ton of aphids on that trifoliate, and we posted it in the Word post, right? We included it in the post for the last word episode. So if you want to have a look at what they look like, or kind of get an idea of how many there were, you can go there and have a look. It wasn't just Ken Currah though. Robert Maloney from Boyd's Farm Services near Listowel had sent me almost the exact same thing, the exact same morning. And we have not had a soybean aphid problem in southwestern Ontario for many, many years. About 5 years ago, they had a problem in that Napanee-Picton area. And typically, Lyndsey, you tend to get more soybean aphid problems in Eastern Ontario, but I think even in Eastern Ontario, it's been a little bit of time since you've had a real outbreak. And the bottom line is it's not that we have a full-scale epidemic yet on soybean aphids, because they're still developing. And until we get to R1 stage of soybeans, we typically don't think that they can do enough damage to the plant to really have a big economic impact. But wow, the threshold is 250 aphids per plant and increasing numbers. And if you do go look at that picture that Ken sent us, there is at least 250 aphids on that trifoliate, let alone on the entire plant. And remember, Lyndsey, that aphids are all born as pregnant females, and if the weather conditions are conducive to them developing, their populations can explode in an incredibly short period of time. So it's called scout, scout, scout. And if they hit threshold, then we need to do something about them. I think it's really cool that we have better control products now than we used to have. It used to be one of our biggest concerns was we go spray with Matador or some control product like that, and it would kill all the beneficials, and it would kill 99% of the aphids, which is really good aphid control, but it almost never killed 100% of the aphids. And because they can repopulate so quickly, we would get an explosion of aphids a second time. And so there's been years where growers would spray 3 times for aphids. And it was because we killed all the beneficials and didn't quite kill all the aphids. We do have products now that only kill the aphids. They do not kill the beneficials. So if we hit threshold and we spray for the aphids, we do not expect that we will see that rebound, and hopefully one spray will do the job. So much better situation in 2026 than we were in 2018 or 2020, something like that.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we are approaching, of course, R1. So it is definitely a concern. I'm glad we're talking about those beneficials, those ladybird beetles, ladybugs, those little alligators you find in a field. They are excellent predators. The adults will eat a lot of aphids, but you're right. Aphids are like those nesting dolls. Like they're born with more in them. So they can explode like crazy. This brings us back, though, not that long ago on The Agronomist, we had a discussion about our predators, our beneficial insects, and we talked, I used a clip from a video you did a few years ago about scouting in our winter wheat or our spring cereals and finding things like cereal leaf beetle and some other insects and watching for the beneficials in those crops and do the building numbers in our earlier crops help our, say, soybeans or corn later? That question, I think, is relevant again this year because, of course, we are seeing some of these other insects in the cereal crops that may also, of course, be eaten by our beneficial insects. So what should we be scouting for in the cereal crops? And are our beneficial insects going to help us out there as well?
And the answer is that we've seen more aphids in the cereal crops, in winter wheat in particular. When we were on the cereal tour, we found plants where the the head was just polluted with aphids. And it takes a lot of aphids at this stage in the wheat crop. It's 50 aphids, 50 aphids per head before you would think of needing control. So we didn't see anything that hit that threshold, but those plots were just loaded with ladybugs, and in particular with the baby alligators that are the larval stage that are running around just voraciously eating those aphids. But Lyndsey, and so they do. That's a really good thing where we build up those beneficials. And ladybugs, they're the visual ones, right? Mm-hmm. But there's syrphid fly larvae, there's damsel bugs, there's a whole range of species out there that feed on the aphids that are much harder to see than the fun little baby alligators running around. They're the easy ones to see. The problem is that when you get to aphids, and particularly soybean aphids, and so the wheat crop starts to senesce, the cereal aphids are done, they move into the oat crop that's nearby, the spring oat crop, the spring barley crop that's much more attractive. So I really think growers with spring cereals need to be scouting hard for aphids, for cereal leaf beetle. We've seen high numbers of cereal leaf beetle in the wheat crop. They are going to move to those spring cereals. So I think we're at high risk in spring cereals. But we move to the soybean crop and we send all the ladybugs we can over to that soybean crop and we say, go ladybugs. Yeah, the aphids just can reproduce so fast that it's almost impossible for the predators to keep ahead of the aphids. And what really wipes the aphids out are the fungal diseases that attack the aphids. So what we really need to decimate the aphids and not need to control them, likely at some point with a control product like Safina that only kills the aphids, what we need is conditions that support diseases like fusarium, because one of the main fungal pathogens of the aphid is a fusarium fungus that is specific to those aphids. And once you get it in the aphids and you have the right weather conditions, it actually spreads like wildfire and can spread faster than even the aphids can reproduce. And that tends to be the end of the aphid problem, much more so than all these fun predatory insects that we talk about, which they help, and they can keep them under threshold for quite a while. But if the conditions continue to be positive for the aphids, the temperatures are right, and not getting too hot, the beneficial predators eventually lose that battle, and we really have to rely on those fungal pathogens.
I cannot believe you are advocating for a fusarium species. Pete, you should be ashamed of yourself. I'm just kidding. No, it is. I think it's a really fascinating discussion about all the different things that come into play, right? In that we love our beneficials. We want to make sure that we're maintaining their populations or even helping them grow if we can. But just like our crops, insects are susceptible to disease as well. And so it's really fascinating to see sort of how it all works and how things are kept in check or not. But ultimately, I think scout. So I don't know what it is about this year and weird insects or building populations. But we also last week had an interesting week of my partner Chris was out at the solar sites that we graze and found armyworm. We found a sheep bot about ready to pupate, which was very strange. I sent that off to Tracy Bowdy and was like, what is this? Because it was a bit terrifying. So it definitely feels like maybe an insect year. So get out and scout. Absolutely. Always good advice. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, Pete. But you're going to stick around. We've got one more segment here on Agronomic Monday here on RealAg Radio on Rural Radio, channel 147, Sirius XM.
Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola, it's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Monday, June 30th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and joining me now to have a very important conversation about nitrogen and all things, well, corn, etc. Better than soybeans anyway. It's Peter Weepy Johnson. Pete, last week on The Agronomists, which, quick reminder, there isn't one tonight, but last week on The Agronomists, we talked about the side dress decision on corn. We talked a lot about the PSNT, the pre-sidedress nitrate test and its reliability. And it was a really good conversation, but there were also a lot of questions we didn't get to and a lot of discussion we didn't get to. So let's start with that test this year here in Ontario anyway. Has it been useful? Has it been a head scratcher? Where are we at with our PSNT, at least at this point?
So, Lyndsey, really interesting is that this Thursday at Honeyland Labs at Elsa Craig, 9:30 in the morning, I will be doing a session with Chris Rowlands and Danny Jeffries from Honeyland on exactly this topic. It's a nutrient management knowledge sharing event for the off-calf program, but if people in that area are interested, show up, because this is such a complex topic, and we aren't going to be able to talk it all through in a 12-minute segment here on RealAg Radio.
But we're going to try, Pete. We're going to try.
We will do our best, baby. We will do our best. So you asked me, the PSNT, the pre-sidedress nitrate test, and what did it look like in the spring of 2025, and was it helpful, and where do we utilize it? So if you can imagine, Lyndsey, if you go way back in time into the late 1980s, early 1990s, I was one of the grunts that helped develop this particular analysis and test, and I carried bags and bags of corn cobs out on my back from, areas like long distances out from the back of a 3,000 foot long cornfield to the front, trying to look at different nitrogen rates on different slope positions. And we did a ton of work. Dr. Gary Kachanowski was the lead, but there was a whole lot of us that it was a lot of effort. And at the end of all that, when you looked at the data, because we really thought, you go to Western Canada, they do a nitrogen test in the fall, and it's pretty close to 1-to-1 for exactly what nitrogen they'll have the next spring. They can utilize that test. It works. Yeah, here in Ontario, we could describe about a third of the variability in nitrogen yields using the pre-sidedress nitrate test. And that's just not good enough. So when you say, where are we at in 2025? Well, I think we've come a long way since the 90s, and we're now using the pre-sidedress nitrate test to adjust our nitrogen rate, not to actually totally predict it.
Okay.
And so, so it's a tool in the toolbox as opposed to being the tool. And that's a different mindset. But there's also this spring, and I don't know, I think you probably heard this from Mark Davis when we were on the Agronomists, right? Mark's going, I've got these big swings in my nitrate side, or my PSNT test, my nitrate test. What's going on? So there's a few things that that growers really need to be aware of that can skew the results. I talked with Greg Stewart. He's the guru of this test. And people will send him results, and he'll get results from the same area, same rotation, same field. And the first one he gets sent will be, 4 parts per million or 15 parts per million. And the next one he gets sent will be 40 parts per million. And how can that be? If you take the test, if you pull the soil cores within 3 days of a significant rain, so we're talking an inch of rain or more, you might as well not take the test, because the nitrate level that you will find will be in the sewer. We haven't quite understood or can't describe why that is, but that simply is. And so the timing of taking that, if the 4 part per million test was taken the day after a 3-inch rain, it means nothing. If the 40 part per million test was taken 4 days after that same 3-inch rain, it's much higher chance of being right. And so you have to take the test at the right time, and then you have to be able to interpret it. And so when I say that, Lyndsey, we sort of don't look at it as a we get a 25, that's a different recommendation than a 26 and a 27. I mean, it is, but we more break it into categories. And the other challenge is that when we developed that test, we developed it in the absence of any nitrogen applied up front, or a maximum of 30 pounds. Well, there's no good corn grower in all of North America that doesn't put on nitrogen up front. I mean, the work from Emerson Nasiger out of Nebraska is quite clear. If you short your corn crop for nitrogen in the early growth stages, you lose yield that you can never recover. So that's why we are now using the PSNT as more of a tweak the rate as opposed to predict the rate. Mm-hmm. Because in Ontario, we're such a wet climate. We know that we start most springs with almost no nitrogen left in the soil profile. And so we are applying at the very minimum 50 pounds of nitrogen. For my own clients, I say I want between 80 and 110 pounds of nitrogen on that corn crop at planting up front. And we do that to make sure we don't short it. And then we try to predict how much more nitrogen we need after we have that nitrogen rate down. And that's when we look at the PSNT. And, if it's high, we might go to 0. If there's manure in the rotation, if there's red clover in the rotation, and we get back a nitrate soil test that says we've got 75 parts per million, I can pretty much guarantee we can grow 275 bushel corn with no added nitrogen beyond that. But if we get a test of 30 parts per million, we're going to add probably another 60, 70, 80 pounds. And typically the full rate is 180. And so it becomes, where do we start to cut that 180 back to 150? Or can we cut it back even to 130? And how much additional nitrogen do we need?
So it's an interesting thought process to think about. Not just, what this test actually tells you, but exactly that, how to interpret it and what to do with it. And the agronomists, when we talked about it, we had Adam Funk out of Manitoba, a much, now still for the prairies, a wetter region, but overall much drier than Ontario. And so the decision making is much different there, where you can't necessarily count on the rain coming. So that makes a difference in how you adjust that rate, or maybe you don't put any more on because it's a very different region. Now, for Ontario, though, it does bring up some questions. And you mentioned, Mark, he had some really great observations about pulling a PSNT on land where he had grown winter wheat and then manured and then grew a cover crop versus where he's potentially put on manure and not put on a cover crop, and how to make that sort of the next year, how to make that decision on the N. That, of course, brings in this complexity of when a cover crop releases nitrogen back, which I think is, Colin Elgie was on the show. He sort of it's a head scratcher, right? As to, it does come back, but when? So how does the manure cover crop PSNT thought process work for you?
So that's such a great scenario that Mark painted. So he's got corn after corn with no manure that year, and his PSNT came back at 21 parts per million. He's got corn after wheat with manure applied after the wheat crop, and oats and oilseed radish growing as a cover crop. And those PSNTs were coming back at 11 parts per million. And you would say, how can I have less nitrogen where I applied hog manure? And I don't know exactly what he applies, but say it's 5,000. So he put on 150 pounds of nitrogen on that wheat. And I'm getting less available nitrogen than I am after a corn crop. I mean, gosh, corn, we know corn ties up nitrogen. And you just go, this can't happen. Well, it can happen because he grew an oat radish cover crop. Any of the nitrogen that the radish picked up, it dumps so early. It just gets killed over winter. And we've seen this time and time again. We talk about how much nitrogen an oilseed radish, a daikon radish can tie up in the fall. And it's massive. They are nitrogen hogs. And they dump it all in February. And then it just gets denitrified or leached or whatever. And when the corn crop needs it, guess what? Nothing there, baby. The oat crop is the exact opposite. And Mark did say he had tremendous growth. You get that oat crop to head out, and those stems are so high in carbon. So our carbon to nitrogen ratio gets, 50 to 1, 60 to 1. Yeah, there's a lot of nitrogen in there. We have no stinking clue when it's ever going to become available. It will eventually become available, but it might be in September, and that is not going to do much good for the corn crop. So I think in that situation, Lyndsey, that the PSNT is the ideal test, because if his oat crop didn't get big, if Mark's oat crop only got, to grow stage 32, was very lush and didn't get stemmy, it could be releasing that nitrogen back right when the corn crop needs it. And then you might have seen a PSNT of 40 and said, wow, I don't really need any additional nitrogen or just another 30 pounds. But the PSNT is the way to test that and to see how much of that organic nitrogen has been released up until that time that the corn crop gets into the rapid growth phase.
Now, there's one other part to this, because Mark's point was, if I'm going to grow winter wheat, put the manure on after harvest. He said I shouldn't grow a cover crop because it messes with application or the availability next year. But that to me brings up another issue of, but if you're applying manure and not growing a cover crop, you risk the loss as well. So how do you broach that? Like, what would be? Is it just that maybe go straight oats? Is it, is it a species difference? How would you broach, putting a cover crop on after with manure to try and capture some of that nitrogen cycling at an optimum time?
And so, Lyndsey, I think that's an awesome question. And it's one where we need more research. But typically, grow an oat crop because you need something that will tie it up. I mean, you can't grow a radish crop. That doesn't work. You could grow red clover, and red clover releases its nitrogen exactly when the corn crop needs it. The problem with red clover is you can put manure on, and as much as you think the red clover would use the manure nitrogen, it tends to just make its own anyway, so it doesn't take up as much of that manure nitrogen as you might like. And maybe there's other species we haven't looked at yet that would take the manure nitrogen up, but be like red clover and release it right when we need it. But there's got to be a sweet spot with crops like oats or barley or cereal rye, where if we only let the oat crop get 16 inches high, we keep the carbon to nitrogen ratio in the right range so that it doesn't break down too early, but it's breaking down in that late May, early June period, the same as the red clover crop. So it's transferring that nitrogen to the corn crop. And that's where the PSNT would work, because I tend to take my oats out in the fall with glyphosate. I don't rely on the winter to kill them. I don't let them go to head. I take them out just as the flag leaf is starting to emerge. And by the time I plant my corn crop, I can hardly see any oat residue at all. And I'm really hopeful that I'm getting that nitrogen cycling a little more targeted. Mm-hmm. So I think we could do it. I think we haven't put the research into it.
All right. We'll leave it there. We're out of time. Pete, fascinating. For anyone who's got maybe a question for Pete, feedback on today's show, feedback on what we've talked about, I think there's so much more we could discuss on this one. So give us a call, 1-855-776-6147, or, of course, you can tweet Pete at WheatPete, or zip him an email, pjohnson@realagriculture.com. You can, of course, also get in touch with me, and I'll let him know. Thank you, Pete, for all of this today. Fascinating conversation. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Lyndsey. And I told you we couldn't do nitrogen in 12 minutes.
Yeah, you're right. There's still way more. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us here on Real Ag Radio, on Rural Radio, channel 147, Sirius XM. We'll be back on Wednesday with a brand new show. Cheers, everybody.